Good morning. Welcome to SHOWstudio's seasonal fashion film review. I'm here with the head of fashion film, Sam Bassett. So we are going to review the films. Sam, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
We had a fair few films in, and as ever with the fashion films that we get, there are lots of films, they're all interesting, but some stand out from others for different reasons. So today we're going to just go through the films that Sam and I thought were probably the most interesting and also provide us with conversation points to talk about different aspects of fashion filmmaking. So without further ado,
let's watch the films.
Absolutely. This is a film by Antoine Bassett, who I know personally, partly because he submitted a film before, this will be his second submission, and partly because he came to see me, so I've met him, said hello.
Yeah.
Tell me what you thought.
I'm very biased towards skate film.
Biased towards them, not against them? Oh, really? Okay.
Because, like many people in film, it was my first access point to film, and
really?
Probably also my first access point to fashion.
Right.
And what I find interesting about skate film is that it is constantly recontextualizing both fashion and the environment.
Yeah.
Take the utility jacket, for example.
Yeah.
When a skater wears it, it's taken away from its original purpose of a fisherman or workwear.
Yeah.
It's given new meaning.
Yeah.
And skateboarding does that in itself. If you look at the geography of skateboarding, the environment is not built for the purpose of skateboarding.
No.
So a car park, for example, is reimagined. No longer are curbs for cars. They're an opportunity to grind or reimagine the built environment. So I think skate films are always very special for me.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. I thought I might have to convince you that's one of some merits. I have to try and take my own personal liking of the gentleman who made the film, Antoine Bassett, who is also the very handsome central character of this. And part of the reason I liked it, I know skateboarding films reasonably well through Ray Nadal, who used to be one of the editors here. She introduced me to that genre, but they tended to be more gnarly. They tended to be kind of often from California, not always.
Spike Jonze style.
Yeah, but just a bit more kind of, that American sort of style. Weirdly, a lot of skaters are very anti-fashion. I guess I mean by anti people in fashion adopting skating as a way of showing fashion. However, there is a huge market in skateboard fashion, which sort of seems slightly contradictory then. The reason I picked up on Antoine's work, first of all, is because he made it look chic. And he has actually a skateboard range of clothes, which he markets separately from film. But I'm a Francophile. I used to live in Paris when I was a kid. I really liked France, I really liked Europe. And I kind of thought it was interesting to see a very chic version of a skate film. And I liked his making it feel very French and very sort of not like a copy of American or Californian skate films, but actually quite like its own thing. Yeah,
there's very few fails or falls in this film.
Yeah.
Most of it is perfection. I think later on there is a couple.
There's a couple, yeah.
But on that note, the way it's shot and edited does resemble that of fashion film. A lot of the techniques are the same, the repetition. And just like fashion film primarily has one motive, which is to show garments in motion, skate films also have a singular motive, and that's just to show skating in motion. So lots of interesting synergy.
So more cinematic, and also there's a certain amount of audaciousness of skating through the Cour Carré du Louvre without being stopped. And I just, there you go.
Oh yeah,
there's a couple of bows coming up. But also I just thought that he was kind of quite an interesting central character for this. As somebody, if you took it away from skating a little bit and just into fashion, what fashion proposes is an aspirational image, and that's usually through a model. And what Antoine's doing here is proposing himself in that role, which I think is very successful. One kind of wants to be him and wear the clothes. So it has the basic elements of a great fashion image. It's a very easy way of making clothes move, because you've got it in a studio and you say, okay, we want these clothes to move, and if the girl or boy hasn't got any, they have to walk, run, dance, jump, whatever it is. But if they're skating, of course, they've got a thing that will make them move around the studio, and there's a certain look, balance, sort of way of standing, etc., etc. So I think absolutely this film and lots of skate films are almost pure fashion films. They are clothes in movement without a narrative.
So they sent us a few films, and they were all really made in a very similar vein.
Yeah.
There was this fusion between somewhat scripted, fictional aspects, and then other quite pure fashion moments of very abstract scenes with very simple movement, but where the viewer is given a lot of time to look at that movement, as seen through the walking shot. It
caught my eye more than I loved it. So I started watching it, and it starts off with the gentleman in the coat by the fence, and I'm thinking, and then he multiplies, there's like 4 or 5 of them, so I'm thinking, okay, well, that's reasonably well done.
Yeah.
And then what won me over was the bands, when they start walking, that graphic.
That's the key shot, I think.
Why it stayed with me, because of course it could just be that and nothing else, is the end shot of the 2 guys in the car sort of talking to each other.
That's the radio playing.
Oh, is it the radio?
I think so.
Right, okay.
Did you give him any money? Not a nickel. How many times you took the garbage out already, Chris? Cleaned up the yard?
So I thought it was a kind of odd set of images to bring together, and it felt like it had started to say something, but it even chose not to conclude it, or was purposely being slightly mysterious in its delivery of a message.
Well, I completely agree. And if I was to analyse each scene, I would say independently, I wouldn't say any of them worked that well, but why it was okay as a film was that it glued all these very different visual languages together, which is actually a very hard thing to do. I mean, we try and do it all the time, and there's lots of different techniques there. You've got a comp shot where, as you said, you see multiple people. You have a 4-way split screen. Then you have this slow shutter moment, and then you go into this kind of hyper-real documentary or fiction type film. These are all opposing languages, but together there was some sense of cohesion, which means that the filmmaker does understand the language they want to use.
Yeah, and also the colour palette kept it all and that was quite nicely controlled.
Yeah.
The grade on the sort of sunset, I think, at the top of the walking ones across the trees I thought was very beautiful.
Yeah.
So I thought it was good. There's obviously, as you say, they knew what they were up to, just I didn't.
What would you say about the actual fashion in this film?
It's not very clearly fashion.
No.
I mean, one could say it is, and you might find that coat, which is quite nice, is by somebody interesting, some designer, you might do, but it's not shouting fashion.
No.
It's a very, like the message of the film is very underplayed, the fashion within it is very underplayed to the point of being not really existing. I would query whether this actually is a fashion film or just an intriguing bit of filmmaking that happens to have some people in clothes.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't put it, if I was trying to define a fashion film, I wouldn't show people this and say, this is what a fashion film looks like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I did think there was a stylistic thing. And I think sometimes that's where people don't understand what fashion film is. It's often about style. So it could be how somebody sits. It could be sort of the allure of the person. It's
interesting that there is an aspirational quality to this, though, because in many ways it's quite a dark, mysterious film. They're wearing ski masks of a sort, or like balaclava. And so there is a dark hue.
Yeah, there's a kind of desire to keep the person you don't engage with them, you don't see who they are. So I think there's something in there.
Cool, should we see another one?
Let's.
And you'll find me every time. Your pretty little lies are a game. I swear I always fall for the
So first of all, at first I was like, where's this going to go? And then I thought, well, actually, the shots are reasonably well composed. The person who made the film is aware of the lighting, they're aware of the environment they're putting the characters in. They're getting a lot of fashion into a small film. I think every scene cut, they change fashion. So you're getting a lot of different bits of fashion into it. So you compare it to a sort of, a fashion story in Vogue magazine where every double-page spread is a new bit of fashion. They're doing that same thing. So in a short space of time, you're being shown, 15, 20 garments. And that's a bit cool. I like the change in pace. The storylines, there's a little sweet love story, girl meets boy, boy meets girl, fall in love, etc. I thought it was interesting in the end. I can't work out whether they're proposing that she drags him home against his will, but then again, they're a good pair of trousers. The clothes become the subject in a way because there's not much else being proposed. So well composed, well lit, nicely graded shots proposing clothes with a sort of very easy to digest story which ends in the conclusion of her painting him, all reasonably well put together.
To me there felt like there was a bit of cheap acting going on in this, and we've talked quite extensively about how modelling and acting are two very different art forms. For me, it just kind of crossed that line into, okay, what is this trying to be? Shall we perfect these beautiful shots with models, or are we trying to tell a narrative? Which to me, the narrative isn't even that interesting. I do think, as you said though, the positive of this film is that there are lots of different looks, and it still feels relatively cohesive, despite changing outfit almost every shot. I think the tonal shift was interesting, but probably slightly unsuccessful. I would have liked to see it more stark.
I totally understand your criticism of it. I do think that there's a bit more mastery of the medium than I see in a lot of films that are submitted. The mastery of colour in a film is something that we both know is quite tricky. Because film grading isn't easy. I think there's a good colour. The filmmaker has understood colour. These sort of subtle beiges and greys and things are all very in keeping, so it's slightly out of that. But then if you look at the film where she's sort of jumping down the tunnel, you look at the clothes she's wearing and the location, they're all quite good in terms of putting a good painting together, we're putting a series of colours together, and we end up in very rich tones. That's quite nice, that journey.
Lovely.
Anyway. All right,
move on?
Let's move on.
Initially, when I first watched this, as the film opens, I kind of felt like I shouldn't be watching it. There's this dark, perverted sense to the filmmaking. It's very voyeuristic. We're creeping through this apartment. It's like the light is attached to the top of the camera.
Like a police torch.
Like a police torch, So we're creeping through this apartment and we're seeing fragments of images, the hand pulling on the pillowcase, and I just felt like I shouldn't be there, which is quite a strange position to be in when you're watching a film. And as the film escalates, we kind of descend into the artificial. And I think for me that's what's special about this film, because personally I quite like films that are a balance or a conversation between both the organic or reality and artifice. And this film is exactly that. What did you think?
I was very taken with it, actually. It dealt with a whole bunch of stuff where my head's been at creatively for the last 5 or so years. I like the premise of it, that you're stuck in lockdown, you can't get out of your house, and you're going to have to find a world you can express yourself in, which is what happened in lockdown. So many people started to look at the Metaverse, as it was called in those days, started to look at the Metaverse as a place to go to meet people, to express themselves, etc., because they couldn't get out into the previous world. So I thought that was an interesting premise. And I really like the fact that he played with 3D scanning.
Yeah.
So he taped bits of the sofa to himself, then scanned himself, and they became clothes. Although they're just shapes and forms. And he used the fact that the scanner is lo-fi and not high quality to sort of round off the bumps and to make them look like they were fused to him as if they'd been attached properly rather than just with belts and things. I really like the sort of brutality of how he made the clothes for himself, and yet how he proposed himself as a sort of, as if they were finished articles. And there's a whole thing about the sort of trading in the internet, trading in the metaverse, where you're sort of saying to people, hey, I made this, do you want it?
Yeah.
Which is quite a nice thing. And the film ends, I guess, with the idea that pieces are made and then they become incredibly popular in Metaverse and everybody wants to wear them, everybody's trading to them. I thought the subtle detail of, say, we made your hands bigger so you could be more expressive was a great detail, apart from the hands weren't very expressive, but we can forgive that. And I like the fact that he then met somebody in the Metaverse who gave him something and he took it home and then it became a real thing in his real life. I like that crossover, that exchange between the two worlds.
When we talk about the Metaverse or artificial realities, we often only talk about it as an opportunity for us in reality to become whoever we want to be through the artificial. But we forget that there's also a relationship the other way, and that's going from the artificial back to reality. And so what can be created in the artificial world could be sucked back out again into the real.
What I really loved about it was the sort of brutality of real life against sort of slight refinement in the sort of metaverse thing, and how literally he's just getting his sofa and emptying the pillow, just stuffing out the sofa and wrapping it around. Because a lot of fashion, look at what Rick Owens does, for instance. It does that. There's a sort of brutal kind of sculptural element to it.
Those sculptures with the sofa reminded me of those, classical images of the grotesque. Almost deformities, and you saw that with the feet as well. So I thought it was quite clever, and that was juxtaposed by the pink candy metaverse.
The fact that it hasn't gone for sort of total real description of an object, but actually sort of rounded the corners off and kind of approximated it and made a new thing, makes it really interesting. It reminds some of the stuff, like some of the sculptures that I love, from Henry Moore or Barbara Hepworth, or even going, just lots of sculptures have this sort of brutality to their form.
Well, it sparked a lot of conversation.
Right, let's move on to the next film.
Let's move on.
I think what always gets me hooked into a film is when I see good cinematography or good photography. And at the beginning of this film, there's a couple of shots, come one after another, where the lighting starts to get interesting. If I saw a still image of it, I'd like it. So I started to get into it. I like men wearing clothes that would normally be seen on women, very much less now, so normally I don't want to use, but I like the fact that when men dress up in different genders, we put it that way. I think it's interesting. I think the more rich life is, the better. I think that it's very, and I like being able to be in a position where I promote that to a certain degree. So I give that a platform. Because I think it's important that there is a platform for showing different forms of gender, different forms of representation of people. I like films which show me a lot of fashion. Not that I had to like the fashion in the film, but I like the fact there was a lot of proposal of fashion throughout it. So you saw, 20 different outfits, almost like whole collections in there. I like the boys in it. I thought that a lot of the shots of them, they looked very appealing and attractive. And I like the sort of confidence in them. You have to think where homosexuality has come from in my lifetime. I was born in 1958. It's probably still illegal in Britain at that point. Now we are celebrating all these different forms of gender and different forms of different relationships between different sexes. For me, that's a real fantastic place to be in at the moment.
The LGBT community has had an increasing amount of light shined on it, quite rightly, but still to this day, black men especially, it is very hard for them to come out as gay. It is still a very oppressed group, so this film is very important for that reason. Those voices are fundamentally, I think, needed. Tell me a bit about the format of this, because when I first watched it, this felt very much like a magazine film. Do you know what I mean by that?
No, what do you mean by that?
It felt almost like it was a companion for an article or something like that.
Right.
The introduction is almost setting up the position or the take of the film. It's telling you, okay, we're going into this world. And then for me, it only really enters the fashion film at this point here. The first half is setting up the context, and that's why in a way it felt a bit like it belonged with ID or Dazed or someone like that. If I had to be critical, and actually it's not critical of film, it's critical of so many films I see, I really hate a voiceover.
Só temos hoje. Hoje é onde se encontram as possibilidades.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, you know, you and I have discussed this, and with other people who work here. There are certain tropes in fashion film which I've seen so much of, and I never loved them. And now I see them again and again, and go, oh God, not a fucking voiceover. So it is something that did skew me a little bit against it.
For me, I feel that it often tells us how to think. I want to feel clever when I'm watching a film. I want to kind of, you know, make the connections, like create my narrative myself.
As a filmmaker, they've further to go. You know, they need to perfect their craft, they need to perfect their lighting. It wasn't bad, and then there's some of those scenes which you said sort of then it kicked in as a fashion film for you, I think is what you said. The lighting in that with that mist and all the colours actually becomes quite beautiful. It just needs to ramp up a few gears, kind of going on level 1, it needs to be on level 10. You really need to work in those patterns. I would much rather the filmmaker cut everything else out and just had those moments and really work those just using coloured smoke and these beautiful boys in these amazing clothes interacting with that and dancing and feeling sexy and kind of feeling, you know, that they're portraying something that they're, you know,
liberated.
That would be better. Just keep it to that. It didn't need the other stuff.
Very interesting film.
Yep.
And hope to see more from this filmmaker.
Yep, learn to edit.
Someone told me I should tell you what LOL or whatever it is means. But I
don't know.
And I can't remember. What did you think?
I was taken with it. I thought it was very clever, a little bit filmmaking. Being a man who says there should never be a narrative in a fashion film, there's quite a nice narrative through it. I, like you, like the kind of crawling through the film on her stomach. I wasn't expecting the end. I thought it was quite interestingly unexpected. And I was just looking at it, kind of thinking, I like those t-shirts.
Yeah, the t-shirts are really cool.
I hope they are marketing those t-shirts and making them available. If not, we can do it on SHOWstudio. All these people doing what they're doing in these t-shirts, all with the same message, implying that the same broken-heartedness of the main character is widespread. I just thought that it was all quite nicely observed in a sort of very, you know, lots of different formats and mediums and qualities of filmmaking, but all reasonably well controlled. And just a kind of nice range of things. And then there's that rather slightly heavy-handed ending, slightly. I think it could have been more poetic and a little bit more gentle. Didn't need to get quite into. If you're going to get into blood and gore, then probably get into it a bit more. But it was just a little bit. It wasn't, you know, it felt like they wanted to go there but didn't.
I think this seems like quite an unusual image for this type of film. But I actually thought it was these moments which made the film good. I was speaking to you before where I was talking about that theme.
Jouissance.
That theme explores this idea of both pleasure and pain simultaneously existing. And we see this often in film, mostly exhibited through how sound and image work. Like in this film, we hear quite a nice whimsical guitar track.
Actually, the singing's really pretty.
Yes, exactly. But the image we're seeing is a challenging image, and that creates quite a complex emotional state when you're watching it. And so there's this cathartic kind of subdued melancholia, and that tone definitely exists because of that visual juxtaposition.
Good. On to the next one. Just
good film.
Good film.
Like it.
Interesting for all the reasons that you and I have said.
You know, growing up, there's this system of hand-me-downs. You get clothes from your older cousins, your older brothers, your older uncle. And I remember I have this specific brown corduroy jacket, Bon Ami, that my grandfather gave to me when I was 50 years old. And I still have that jacket to this day. I think it's beautiful because somebody else gets to continue its story, create a new story, almost taking this story and giving it a whole new chapter.
Feels like a documentary.
This is a bit,
Yeah. It takes place in a marketplace where we can see a whole variety of clothes, and the narrative kind of takes us on this journey about how the West are dumping clothes. Having spoken to a journalist last week actually, that when we donate our clothes to the clothing bins, they get sent to places in Africa. Yet so many of those items of clothes are for winter conditions in the UK. And therefore they are never used, and they just pile up in landfill. So the film really resonated with me for that reason. But then there's this transformative quality to the film. Taking those garments and reworking them into something else. I didn't go to fashion school, but I've heard that one of the first tasks is to go to a second-hand store, buy a white shirt, and remake something from the white shirt. So
interesting.
It feels like that kind of premise to me.
It is a problem that we are creating such huge numbers of clothes, and I think young fashion students are reacting against that. I think that fashion is, one of the biggest polluters on the planet, and does have to address that. It can't keep on playing lip service to kind of, we're all kind of getting greener and more careful of the planet, whilst not. And I think there is, as you totally say, this sort of, awfulness of the West just dumping their old clothes onto communities in Africa and elsewhere that have no need for them. I find the two main protagonists in this film, I guess, the two designers who are re-evaluating clothing by taking it apart, recutting it up. You can see that in the work of somebody like Duran, who works for or has worked for us before, where he does exactly that. He takes a Gucci top and a Saint Laurent top and cuts them together and makes a new piece of clothing. You can see it in the work of John Galliano at Margiela. He has a line called Recicla, where literally, as you say, they go to a vintage shop and they find a coat and they strip it apart and they remake it and they sell it as a remade. So they are recycling clothes in that way. So there are people who are doing it in interesting ways, and it takes it right back to Bring and Buy, which was an early project on SHOWstudio, where we asked people to donate a piece of clothing to SHOWstudio, and we got it from quite a lot of celebrities there. Patti Smith donated one, Bjork donated one, Tilda Swinton donated one. There were lots of interesting people donating clothes to SHOWstudio, and then we got groups of stylists in from the different magazines, one from Days, one from ID, one from Vogue, etc., and they reshaped the clothes and reconstruct them. So Bring and Buy was a way of saying, actually, the clothes we have, should still be worn. And to some degree, something quite interesting in there, because the clothes also have some history to them. So a sweater you might have, fallen in love with your partner in is more valuable in some ways than a sweater which you just put on and had nothing was sort of important to you.
The reconstructive aspect of the garments in this film is really also defended by how the film is physically put together, which I really like. It almost feels collagey in places. We have lots of different types of split screen. We have these quick zooms in from above, going from very wide to very close in the marketplace. I think this is a good example of when a filmmaker has understood their narrative and then thought about the techniques that serve what they want to say. Which means it's very clear, and I think even if you don't like it stylistically, it feels cohesive.
Yeah. No, I still liked it. I thought it was good. Lovely.
Me too.
Thank you very much,
Nick.
Pleasure. Thank you, Sam.
Really good.
Good chatting to you. I look forward to seeing more fashion films.